A soaked German Shepherd mother emerged from the cold spring rain alone, exhausted, her fur clinging to her body, trembling. She had lost everything and shouldn't have survived this night. Yet, deep in the dark forest, her newborn puppies waited helplessly in a cage, stripped of all hope. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and share your city or state in the comments below. It was early spring in Montana, the kind of season when the last grip of winter loosens but the warmth has not yet fully arrived, and a cold, steady rain fell across the vast forest, soaking the earth and whispering through the tall pine trees that surrounded a small weathered cabin standing alone at the edge of the wilderness. Jack Turner lived there, a man shaped by both discipline and loss, a retired Navy SEAL in his late 60s, tall and broad-shouldered though age had begun to weigh on him, his posture still straight from years of training, his face deeply lined with sharp, defined angles, a short gray beard framing his jaw, and piercing blue eyes that once held command and certainty but now carried a quiet, enduring sadness. He was known, in the rare moments he interacted with others, as a man of few words, calm and respectful, yet distant, as if a part of him had long since retreated somewhere no one else could reach. A change that began years ago after a tragic accident took both his wife, Sarah, and their young son, leaving behind a silence in his life that even time could not soften. Sarah had been a gentle and warm-hearted woman, slender and graceful with long chestnut hair and soft green eyes, her voice always calm, the kind of person who could make any place feel like home, and her loss had carved something hollow inside Jack that no mission, no training, no discipline could ever fill. And so he chose solitude, retreating into the mountains where the world asked nothing of him and where he no longer had to pretend he was whole. The rain that night came heavier than usual, tapping against the wooden walls and roof of the cabin in a steady rhythm that echoed through the quiet interior. And Jack sat by the small fireplace, the dim orange glow reflecting across the room, his hands wrapped loosely around a metal cup of lukewarm coffee he had long forgotten to drink, his mind drifting, as it often did on nights like this, back to memories he never invited but could never escape, memories tied to rain, to cold nights, to the feeling of losing something you could never protect despite all your strength. He had trained to survive anything, to endure pain, to stay focused under pressure, but none of that had prepared him for grief. And even now, years later, the sound of rain still pulled him into that place, where regret lingered quietly, where unanswered questions echoed without resolution. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine through the cracks in the cabin, and for a long moment, everything felt still, suspended between past and present, until something broke through the steady sound of rain, something faint, almost lost in the distance, a thin, fragile sound that didn't belong to the storm. Jack's head lifted slowly, his expression tightening, his instincts, long dormant but never gone, reacting before his thoughts could catch up, and he held his breath, listening carefully as the sound came again, weak and trembling, barely audible, yet unmistakable, the soft cry of something small, something alive, something in distress. He stood up without hesitation, the years falling away from his movements as he crossed the room, his senses sharpening, his body remembering what it meant to respond, to act, to move toward danger instead of away from it. And for the first time in a long while, there was something else beneath the weight of his thoughts, something like purpose, fragile but real. He stepped toward the window, pushing aside the worn curtain, his eyes scanning the dark forest beyond, where rain blurred the outlines of trees and shadows shifted with the wind. And though he saw nothing, the sound came again, faint but persistent, carried between the drops of rain like a call that refused to disappear. For a brief moment he hesitated, not out of fear, but because he understood what it meant to answer a call like that, because stepping into that storm meant stepping out of the quiet isolation he had built for himself, meant opening the door to something unpredictable. Something that could not be controlled or ignored, and yet something inside him, something older than grief, stronger than solitude, refused to let him sit back down and pretend he hadn't heard it. Jack reached for his old raincoat, the fabric worn but reliable, and pulled it over his shoulders, his hands steady as he grabbed a flashlight from the wooden table near the door, the beam flickering to life as he tested it, casting a narrow path of light across the floor. And as he stood there for a second longer, he felt a familiar tension settle into his chest. Not the pain of loss this time, but the quiet readiness of a man about to move forward, to do something that mattered, even if he didn't yet know what he would find. The rain continued to fall as he opened the door, the cold air rushing in to meet him, and without looking back, without giving himself another chance to hesitate, Jack Turner stepped out into the dark, into the rain-soaked forest, following the faint, desperate sound that had broken through the silence of his lonely life. The rain had not softened as Jack Turner moved deeper into the forest. Instead, it seemed to grow heavier, each drop striking the ground with a steady persistence that blurred the world into shifting shadows and silver streaks, and the narrow beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness just enough to guide his steps over slick roots and uneven ground, his boots sinking slightly into the wet soil as the scent of mud and pine thickened around him. And though the cold pressed against his skin, it was not the discomfort that held his attention, but the fragile sound ahead. The same faint cry he had heard from his cabin, now clearer, trembling and urgent, pulling him forward with a quiet insistence he could not ignore. Jack moved with practiced caution, his body instinctively adjusting to the terrain, his breathing controlled, his senses alert. And as he advanced, the forest began to open into a small clearing where the rain fell harder without the shelter of branches, and something about the space felt wrong, out of place in a way that immediately tightened the muscles in his shoulders. Because even before he saw it clearly, he recognized the signs of human interference. The unnatural lines, the broken brush, the faint metallic glint reflecting his light. When his flashlight finally settled on the center of the clearing, he stopped, his expression hardening as the scene came into focus. A rusted metal cage sat half-sunken in the mud, its bars slick with rain, and inside it stood a German shepherd, a female, large and strong in build, though visibly weakened, her black and tan coat completely soaked, the fur clinging tightly to her lean frame, making every rib and muscle line more pronounced, her ears erect despite her exhaustion, her posture tense and protective even within the confinement, and her eyes, dark, intelligent, filled with both fear and defiance, locked onto Jack the moment the light touched her. Bella, though he did not yet know her name, carried the unmistakable presence of a trained or well-raised dog, not wild, not feral, but disciplined, her stance controlled despite the obvious distress, her gaze sharp as if measuring him, deciding in silence whether he was another threat or something else entirely, and for a brief second neither of them moved, the rain filling the space between them like a curtain of uncertainty. Then the sound came again, closer now, and Jack shifted his light downward, and what he saw next tightened something deep in his chest, just outside the cage. Pressed against its side as if trying to stay close to the one thing that felt like safety, were 3 small German shepherd puppies, no more than a few weeks old, their bodies tiny and fragile against the harshness of the world around them, their fur completely soaked and darkened by rain, clumped with mud, their small forms trembling uncontrollably as they huddled together, each one leaning into the others for warmth, their ears pinned back, their wide eyes reflecting both fear and confusion, and every slight movement they made seemed to cost them what little strength they had left. The ground beneath them had turned into a shallow pool of muddy water, rain collecting faster than it could drain, and with every drop that fell, small ripples spread outward, touching their paws, soaking them further, and Jack could see the way their bodies shivered in response, the way their heads lifted weakly toward the cage whenever Bella shifted or made even the slightest sound, as if her presence alone was the only thing keeping them from giving in to the cold and exhaustion. Bella let out a low, warning growl at first, her voice rough but steady, her body pressing closer to the bars as if she could somehow reach them, protect them. And when Jack took a cautious step forward, she reacted instantly, her posture rising, her lips pulling back slightly to reveal her teeth, not in blind aggression, but in defense, in the desperate instinct of a mother who had nothing left but the need to protect her young. And yet even in that moment, there was hesitation in her eyes, something that suggested she understood the difference between cruelty and something else, something she had perhaps known before, whatever had brought her here. Jack slowly lowered the flashlight beam, angling it away from her face to avoid blinding her, his movements deliberate, controlled, the same calm approach he had used in situations where trust could mean survival. And though he did not speak, there was something in the way he stood, in the absence of sudden motion, that signaled he was not like the others who had placed her here. As he scanned the clearing more carefully, the rest of the scene revealed itself in pieces, scattered objects half hidden by rain and darkness. A broken wooden crate lying on its side, its edges splintered, lengths of rope tangled nearby, metal bowls overturned and filled with rainwater, and farther back, partially obscured by a tarp weighed down with stones, the rough outline of what could only be described as a temporary setup. Not permanent, not carefully built, but functional enough for someone who did not intend to stay long. And the smell in the air, faint but unmistakable, carried the scent of oil and neglect, confirming what Jack already suspected. This was not an accident, not an abandoned pet, but a place used by people who saw animals as nothing more than objects to control and sell. And the thought settled heavily in his mind, bringing with it a quiet anger that he did not express outwardly, but that sharpened his focus even further. He stepped closer to the cage, slowly enough to give Bella time to react, and this time, instead of growling, she held his gaze, her breathing uneven but steadying slightly, as if she was weighing something, measuring his presence against whatever memory she carried of human hands, and then, almost imperceptibly, her posture shifted, not relaxed, but no longer fully defensive. Her ears still forward, her body still tense, but her eyes, those eyes filled with exhaustion and determination, softened just enough to reveal something deeper than fear. One of the puppies let out a weak whimper, its small body faltering as it tried to stand, and Bella turned her head instantly toward it, a soft, urgent sound escaping her throat, completely different from the growl before, a sound that spoke of concern, of instinct, of a bond that nothing in that storm could break. And when she looked back at Jack, there was no mistaking what had changed, because in that moment, through the rain, through the cold, through the weight of everything that had brought them to this place, Bella was no longer just a trapped animal. She was a mother asking for help. The rain continued to fall in relentless sheets, drumming against the metal cage and pooling into the muddy ground as Jack remained partially hidden behind a cluster of wet brush at the edge of the clearing, his body low and still, his breathing controlled as he observed the fragile balance between fear and survival unfolding before him. And though every instinct inside him urged him to step forward immediately, years of training held him in place, forcing him to wait, to assess, to understand the full situation before acting. Because rushing in without knowing the threat could mean making things worse for the very lives he was trying to protect.
Good girl, Bella.
The sound
All right,
came
you don't need to be
first,
afraid.
not from the
Just
puppies
relax.
this time,
You all right,
but from
pups?
somewhere beyond the tarp-covered structure at the far side of the clearing. The heavy crunch of boots against wet gravel, followed by the sharp metallic clink of something being handled carelessly, and Jack's eyes narrowed slightly as a figure emerged through the rain, stepping into the dim wash of his peripheral vision. A man whose presence immediately shifted the air in the clearing, as if something colder than the rain had entered the space. Rick was the kind of man whose roughness showed not only in his posture but in every detail of his appearance. Tall and thick-built, with a heavy neck and broad shoulders that suggested strength without discipline. His head completely shaved, rainwater sliding down his scalp and along the sharp edges of his skull. His face hard and weathered with uneven stubble along his jaw. His eyes small and dark, carrying a detached indifference that bordered on cruelty. The kind of look seen in someone who had long ago stopped questioning the consequences of his actions. And the way he moved, slow, confident, careless, revealed a man who believed he was in control of everything around him. He wore a black jacket, soaked through and clinging to his body, and heavy boots that sank slightly into the mud with each step, and in his hand, he dragged a thick rubber hose that trailed behind him, leaving a dark line across the ground as water continued to spill from its open end. Without even glancing toward the cage, Rick walked past Bella and the puppies, his attention fixed on the equipment near the tarp, as if they were nothing more than objects waiting to be processed. And for a moment, Jack felt the tension in his jaw tighten, not out of fear, but out of the quiet anger that came from recognizing a familiar kind of disregard for life, something he had seen before in darker places, under different circumstances, but never something he had learned to accept. Bella reacted instantly to the man's presence, her body stiffening, her ears flattening slightly as a low growl rumbled from her chest. Deeper and more urgent than before, her eyes no longer questioning but filled with a clear and focused hostility. And the puppies, sensing the shift, pressed even closer together, their small bodies trembling more violently, their fragile whimpers barely audible over the rain, yet filled with a helplessness that cut through the noise like something sharp and unavoidable. Rick turned then, as if finally acknowledging the animals, and his expression did not change, not even slightly, as he approached them with the same detached calm, stopping a few feet away from the puppies, looking down at them without interest, as though evaluating something of minimal value. And then, without hesitation, he lifted the hose, adjusting his grip with a practiced ease that suggested this was not the first time he had done something like this. The water came in a sudden, forceful burst, the pressure high enough to send a sharp spray across the muddy ground before striking the puppies directly. And the reaction was immediate and devastating, their small bodies recoiling under the impact, their legs slipping in the mud as they struggled to stay upright, their cries rising in pitch and desperation as the cold water soaked through their already drenched fur, pushing them further toward exhaustion, their tiny forms shaking uncontrollably as the combined force of rain and spray overwhelmed their ability to endure. Bella lunged forward inside the cage, her body slamming against the bars with a metallic crash that echoed through the clearing, her bark breaking through the storm in a raw, furious sound, her teeth bared as she pushed against the confinement with everything she had, driven by a desperate need to reach her young, to stop what was happening. But the cage held firm, the rusted metal rattling under the impact but refusing to give. And the frustration in her voice shifted into something deeper, something almost unbearable, a sound that carried both rage and helplessness at the same time. Jack's grip tightened around the flashlight, though he had long since angled it away, his mind already moving, analyzing distances, angles, timing, the position of the man, the layout of the clearing, the possible risks. And yet beneath that calculation, there was something else rising, something more immediate, more human, a refusal to stand by any longer as the scene unfolded in front of him. Because this was no longer just a situation to assess, it was a line that had already been crossed. Another figure appeared near the tarp then, younger, thinner, his movements less certain, and Jack shifted his attention briefly as the second man stepped into view. Ethan, no older than 20, his frame lean and slightly hunched as if he had not yet grown into his own height. His light brown hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, his face still carrying the softness of youth, though his eyes held something more complicated, a mixture of discomfort and unease that set him apart from the man beside him. Ethan wore a faded gray hoodie under a worn jacket, both soaked through, and his hands moved nervously as he glanced between Rick and the struggling puppies, his jaw tightening slightly as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage, his body language betraying a conflict he had not yet resolved. And when Rick laughed, a short, dismissive sound that barely rose above the rain, it seemed to push Ethan further into silence, reinforcing whatever hold the older man had over him. "They'll toughen up," Rick muttered, his voice low and rough, barely audible, though the tone carried clearly enough. And Ethan flinched almost imperceptibly, his eyes dropping for a second before lifting again, drawn back to the sight he could not ignore. And for that brief moment, Jack saw something in him. Not strength, not yet, but the beginning of something that could become it, if given the chance. The water continued for a few seconds longer before Rick lowered the hose, satisfied or simply bored, letting the stream fall harmlessly into the mud, and the puppies collapsed closer together, their movements weaker now, their small chests rising and falling rapidly as they fought to recover, their bodies still shaking as the rain continued to fall over them. And Bella's barking did not stop, her voice raw and relentless, her eyes locked not on Rick, but on her puppies, as if trying to hold them together through sheer will alone. Jack exhaled slowly, his decision no longer something he needed to think about, but something already made, his body shifting slightly as he adjusted his stance, the familiar clarity of purpose settling into place. And as he watched the two men, the cage, the puppies, and the fragile line between survival and loss, he understood one thing with absolute certainty. He could not wait any longer. The rain did not let up, and if anything, it deepened into something heavier, more relentless, as if the sky itself had decided to drown out every sound beneath it. And Jack Turner remained motionless in the shadows at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the scene before him while his mind shifted into a different state entirely, one shaped not by emotion but by precision, by training that had been etched into him through years of missions where hesitation meant failure, and failure meant loss. And though this was not a battlefield in the traditional sense, the structure of the moment felt familiar, the presence of a threat, the need for timing, the understanding that one wrong move could cost lives that had no way to defend themselves. He adjusted his stance slightly, lowering his center of gravity as his gaze traced the layout of the clearing again, but this time not as an observer, but as someone preparing to act, noting distances, entry points, obstacles, the position of Rick near the tarp, the slight shift in Ethan's posture as he lingered closer to the edge rather than fully committing to the center, the placement of the cage, the direction of the wind, the way the rain masked smaller sounds but amplified sudden movement, and he began to build a plan piece by piece. Not something complex, but something precise, something that relied on timing and control rather than force. The key was disruption. He knew that immediately, because men like Rick thrived in control, in routine, in the confidence that nothing around them would suddenly change. And if that control was broken, even briefly, it created an opening, a moment where attention fractured and instinct replaced intention, and that was all Jack needed. His eyes moved toward the faint outline of a small generator partially hidden under the tarp, its low mechanical hum barely audible beneath the rain, but consistent enough to confirm its role, powering whatever lights and equipment the men relied on. And Jack understood that cutting it would not only plunge the clearing into darkness, but also disrupt the sense of stability Rick operated under, forcing him to react rather than dictate. He exhaled slowly, his breathing steady as he mapped the sequence in his mind. Move along the outer edge of the clearing. Stay within the darker patches where the rain fell heaviest. Approach the generator from the blind side, disable it quickly and quietly, then use the confusion to reach the cage, open it, secure the puppies, and get out before either man fully regained control of the situation. It was simple, but simplicity, he had learned, was often the difference between success and failure. Bella's barking had quieted slightly now, not because her urgency had faded, but because her energy was being spent, her body still pressed close to the bars, her eyes never leaving her puppies, and Jack could see the strain in her movements, the way exhaustion threatened to take hold. And that only shortened the time he had because the longer he waited, the less strength they would have left to survive what came next. The puppies lay closer together now, their movements minimal, their bodies still trembling under the constant rain, and Jack felt the weight of that image settle into him, not as distraction, but as reinforcement, as a reminder of what this was about, and why hesitation was no longer an option. Rick had moved back toward the tarp, his attention briefly shifting to something inside, perhaps checking supplies or simply waiting out the rain, his posture loose, unconcerned, the kind of careless confidence that came from believing there was no threat, and Ethan remained nearby, though his stance had changed subtly, his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands restless at his sides, his gaze drifting repeatedly toward the puppies and then away again, as if he could not decide whether to look or not. And there was something in that movement, something unfinished, that caught Jack's attention, not as an immediate factor in the plan, but as a variable, something that could shift depending on how the next moments unfolded. Jack moved then, slowly, deliberately, his boots finding the softest ground, placing each step with care to avoid unnecessary sound, the rain working in his favor, masking the small disturbances he could not completely eliminate, and he kept his body angled low, using the natural dips in the terrain to stay out of direct line of sight, his path curving around the edge of the clearing toward the rear of the tarp where the generator sat, its faint vibration now clearer as he closed the distance. The smell of fuel grew stronger, mixing with the damp air, and he paused briefly behind a fallen branch, watching for any sign that he had been noticed. But Rick remained distracted, his back partially turned, and Ethan's attention was still divided, his eyes not focused on any one point long enough to catch movement in the shadows. Jack reached the generator, crouching beside it as his hand moved quickly, efficiently, locating the main switch, his fingers steady despite the rain that slicked the surface, and for a fraction of a second he waited, not out of doubt, but to synchronize with the environment, to choose the exact moment when the natural noise would be at its peak, when the disruption would feel less like an action and more like an extension of the storm itself. The sky answered him before he needed to decide, a sudden flash of lightning tearing across the darkness, followed almost instantly by a deep, rolling thunder that shook the air, and in that moment, Jack cut the power. The hum of the generator stopped abruptly. The small light under the tarp flickered and died, and the clearing was swallowed by a thicker darkness, broken only by the uneven flashes of distant lightning and the constant fall of rain, and the shift was immediate. Rick's head snapping up as he turned sharply, his body tensing as confusion replaced his earlier indifference, his voice cutting through the storm in a rough shout as he stepped forward, trying to understand what had changed. Ethan froze for a second, his eyes widening slightly, his gaze moving toward the generator and then out into the darkness. And though he did not yet move, something in his posture shifted again. Less rigid now, less aligned with Rick's control, as if the sudden loss of light had loosened something inside him as well. Jack did not wait. The moment had come, and he moved with it, leaving the generator behind as he angled toward the cage. His steps faster now, but still controlled, his focus narrowing to the task ahead, the distance closing quickly as the shapes of Bella and the puppies emerged through the darkness. And though the rain still fell, though the danger had not disappeared, everything had aligned for a single, critical window and Jack stepped into it without hesitation. The darkness settled fast after the generator died, swallowing the clearing in a thick, uneven shadow broken only by flashes of lightning that came and went like brief glimpses of another world, and Jack Turner moved through it with purpose. His body no longer hesitant, no longer divided between observation and action, because now there was only one direction left to take, and he closed the distance to the cage with controlled urgency, his boots splashing lightly through shallow puddles as the rain continued to fall hard against his shoulders and face, soaking through the edges of his coat. Yet none of it slowed him. None of it mattered compared to the fragile lives in front of him. Bella saw him before he reached the cage, her head snapping toward his movement even in the darkness, her body still tense, still ready to defend, and for a fraction of a second her instincts surged again, her muscles tightening, her breath quickening, her teeth barely visible as she prepared for whatever came next. But this time, something held her back. Something in the way he moved, in the absence of aggression, in the quiet steadiness that replaced the chaos around them. And she did not lunge, she did not bark. She watched. Jack crouched low beside the cage, his hands moving quickly but carefully as he reached for the rusted latch, the metal slick beneath his fingers, the hinge stiff from neglect, and he paused only briefly, not out of doubt, but to let Bella adjust, to give her the space to decide, because forcing the moment would only create another threat. And in that small pocket of stillness, despite the rain, despite the danger, there was a silent exchange between them that required no words, only understanding. The latch gave with a dull metallic click, and the door shifted slightly as Jack pulled it open, the sound barely audible beneath the storm, and he leaned back just enough to allow Bella the first move, his posture open but ready, his eyes steady on her, and for a second longer she did not move, her gaze fixed on him, searching, measuring, and then slowly, cautiously, she stepped forward, her body slipping through the opening, her movements unsteady at first but strengthening with each step as the freedom she had been denied returned to her, and when she stood fully outside the cage, the rain striking her back, she did not turn on Jack, she did not retreat. She turned immediately toward her puppies. They responded to her presence instantly, their weak cries rising again as they shifted toward her, their small bodies struggling to move through the mud, and Bella lowered her head, nudging them gently, her movements urgent but controlled, checking each one in turn as if confirming they were still there, still alive. And Jack watched for only a moment before stepping forward again, because time was already narrowing around them. He knelt beside the puppies, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness as he gathered them one by one, lifting their small, trembling bodies from the cold ground, their fur soaked through, their warmth nearly gone. And he pulled open the front of his coat, tucking them inside against his chest where his body heat could reach them, where the rain could no longer touch them directly. And as he did, he felt the faint, uneven movement of their breathing, the fragile rhythm of life still holding on. Behind him, a voice cut through the rain, sharp and angry, Rick's confusion turning quickly into realization, and Jack did not turn, did not look back, because he had already accounted for that moment, already accepted it as part of the plan, and instead he focused on what came next, shifting his weight as he rose to his feet, securing the puppies with one arm while his other hand steadied his movement. Ethan stood several feet away, partially obscured by the darkness, his figure tense but unmoving, his eyes wide as they followed the scene unfolding in front of him. And for a brief second, Jack met his gaze, not with challenge, not with warning, but with something quieter, something that did not demand action, but allowed it. And Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, his hands clenching at his sides before relaxing again. And he did not step forward. He did not call out, he simply remained where he was, his silence speaking more than words could have. Rick moved toward them then, faster now, his heavy boots splashing through the mud, his voice rising as he shouted something indistinct, anger and disbelief mixing in a way that made his movements less controlled, less precise. And Jack used that, turning slightly as he positioned himself between the man and the path leading back into the trees. His body angled not to fight, but to move, because this was not a confrontation he needed to win, only a moment he needed to escape. Bella stepped in front of him before he could move, her body lowering slightly, her stance firm despite her exhaustion, her ears forward, her eyes locked on Rick with a sharp intensity that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with protection. And when she let out a low warning growl, it carried a clarity that cut through the storm, a message that needed no translation. Rick hesitated just for a second, the shift so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but Jack saw it, the brief disruption in confidence, the moment where instinct replaced certainty, and it was enough. Jack moved, turning away from the clearing and stepping into the darker line of trees, his pace controlled but urgent, each step taking him further from the threat, further into the cover of the forest, and Bella followed without hesitation, her movements quick despite her fatigue, staying close, her attention divided between Jack and the space behind them as if ensuring nothing followed too closely. The rain softened slightly as they moved deeper into the trees, the branches above breaking some of the direct fall, and Jack adjusted his hold on the puppies, feeling one of them shift weakly against his chest, a small sign of life that reinforced his pace, and though the distance between them and the clearing was not yet enough to guarantee safety, the immediate danger had passed, replaced by the longer, quieter task of survival.
Come on, Bella.
He did not look back, not because he was certain they would not be followed, but because he knew that looking back would change nothing, and instead he focused on the path ahead, the faint memory of the route he had taken from the cabin guiding him as he moved through the rain-soaked forest, carrying with him not just the weight of the small lives pressed against him, but the unmistakable understanding that something had changed, something that could not be undone. And as Bella kept pace beside him, no longer a prisoner, no longer alone, it was clear that the moment of decision had already passed, and there was no turning back. The forest closed around them as Jack Turner pushed forward through the darkness, the rain still falling in relentless sheets that blurred the edges of the world into motion and shadow. And though the immediate chaos of the clearing had been left behind, the urgency had not faded. It had only shifted into something quieter but no less demanding, because now survival depended not on speed alone, but on endurance, on direction, on keeping the fragile lives he carried alive long enough to reach shelter. His boots struck the ground with measured force, careful not to lose footing on the slick terrain, each step chosen with the precision of someone who had learned long ago that a single mistake in the wrong environment could cost everything. And he adjusted his breathing to match his pace, steady and controlled despite the weight pressing against his chest, where the 3 puppies lay tucked inside his coat, their small bodies trembling against him, their breaths uneven but still present, still holding on. The warmth from his body was beginning to reach them, slowly pushing back against the cold that had soaked into their fur and skin, and Jack felt one of them shift weakly, a faint movement that confirmed they were still fighting, still there, and that was enough to keep him moving forward without hesitation. Behind him, Bella followed, her movements less steady, her strength stretched thin from confinement, exhaustion, and the strain of the past hours. Yet she did not falter, did not slow beyond what her body allowed, her eyes fixed ahead, her focus locked on Jack and the small forms he carried, as if every remaining ounce of energy she had was anchored to them. And though her legs trembled at times, though her breathing grew heavier, she continued, driven by something deeper than fatigue, something instinctive and unbreakable. The rain softened slightly as they moved deeper into the forest, the dense canopy above absorbing part of the downpour, but the ground remained treacherous, slick with mud and scattered with fallen branches, and Jack adjusted his path accordingly, choosing higher ground when possible, avoiding areas where water had begun to pool, his familiarity with the terrain guiding him even in the limited visibility, because this was his land now, not owned, but known, memorized through years of quiet living and solitary movement. Far behind them, barely audible through the rain, there was a distant shout. Rick's voice carried faintly on the wind, but it did not come closer, did not follow with the same urgency, and Jack recognized what that meant. The disruption had been enough. The darkness and confusion had broken the momentum of pursuit, at least for now, and though he did not allow himself to relax, he understood that the immediate danger had passed into something less immediate, something that would need to be dealt with later, but not now. In the clearing they had left behind, Ethan stood alone for a moment longer after Jack disappeared into the trees, the rain falling steadily around him, his chest rising and falling unevenly as he stared into the darkness where the figures had vanished. And for the first time since he had arrived in that place, the noise around him seemed to fade, replaced by something quieter, something internal that he could no longer ignore.
Keep your heads down, pups.
Ethan had never imagined himself there. Not truly, though he had told himself otherwise when he first agreed to work with Rick, convincing himself it was temporary, that it was just a way to make money, that he could leave whenever he wanted. But standing there now, with the image of the soaked puppies burned into his mind, with the sound of Bella's bark still echoing somewhere deep inside him, those excuses no longer held, and the weight of what he had been part of settled heavily in his chest. He was thin, not weak, but not hardened either, his movements often uncertain as if he had never fully committed to any one version of himself. His face still carrying the softness of youth, his light brown hair hanging damp against his forehead, and his eyes, restless, searching, now held something new, something sharper, something that looked uncomfortably like realization. Rick's voice broke through his thoughts again, closer this time, angrier, demanding answers that Ethan did not have, and for a brief moment, he considered responding, stepping back into that role, pretending nothing had changed. But his body did not move, his feet remained planted, and instead, slowly, almost without fully deciding, he turned away from the voice, from the clearing, from the life he had stepped into without understanding, and he walked in the opposite direction, his steps uneven at first, then steadier as distance grew between him and the place he no longer recognized as something he could return to. Jack continued forward, unaware of Ethan's decision, his focus entirely on reaching the cabin, and as the faint outline of familiar terrain began to emerge through the darkness, a subtle shift occurred in his pace, not faster, but more certain, because he knew he was close, the path narrowing into a slight incline that led toward the clearing where his cabin stood, hidden among the trees, protected not by walls or fences, but by isolation and knowledge. When the cabin finally came into view, its dark silhouette barely visible against the night, Jack felt a small but undeniable release of tension, not relief, not yet, but the first step toward it. And he moved towards the door without slowing, reaching it in a few quick strides before pushing it open, the hinges creaking softly as he stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of rain and earth, the sound of the storm following just behind him before the door closed again, sealing it out. The interior felt warmer immediately, not truly warm yet, but sheltered, contained, and Jack moved quickly to the fireplace, kneeling as he shifted the puppies from his coat onto a folded blanket he pulled from a nearby chair, his hands working with practiced efficiency as he added wood to the fire, coaxing the small flame into something stronger, something that could push back against the cold that had followed them inside. Bella entered a second later, her body hesitant at the threshold for only a brief moment before she stepped fully into the cabin, her eyes scanning the space quickly before returning to the puppies, and she moved toward them, lowering herself beside them, her body curling protectively around their small forms as if the walls themselves were not yet enough to guarantee their safety. Jack watched her for a moment, the firelight flickering across both of them, and though nothing had been spoken, nothing agreed upon, there was a quiet understanding in that space, something fragile but real. And as the storm continued outside, the cabin held steady, offering not certainty but something close enough for now. The rain continued outside, softer now, but steady, tapping gently against the wooden walls of the cabin as Jack Turner worked with focused urgency, his movements controlled but no longer driven by immediate danger, instead guided by something quieter, something that felt almost unfamiliar after so many years, a sense of responsibility that reached beyond survival and into something deeper, something that asked him not just to act, but to care. The fire responded quickly to his efforts, the small flame growing stronger as fresh wood caught, spreading a steady warmth through the room that slowly pushed back against the cold that had followed them inside, and the light from it flickered across the walls, casting moving shadows that made the space feel less empty than it had before.
Keep still now.
Jack knelt beside the blanket where he had placed the puppies, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness as he began to dry them, one at a time, using an old but clean towel he pulled from a nearby shelf, the fabric rough but warm as he pressed it carefully against their soaked fur, absorbing the moisture that had seeped deep into their small bodies. And as he worked, he could feel how fragile they were, how little it would take for them to slip away if the cold held on too long. The first puppy let out a weak, trembling sound as he dried its back, its tiny body flinching slightly before settling, its breathing uneven but present. And Jack adjusted his touch instinctively, slower now, more deliberate, as if he understood without thinking that strength was not what they needed, but steadiness. Bella remained close, her body curled protectively around the space where the other two puppies lay, her eyes tracking Jack's every movement at first, her posture tense, ready to react if needed. But as the minutes passed and nothing in his actions suggested harm, that tension began to ease, not disappearing entirely but softening into something watchful rather than defensive. When Jack reached for the second puppy, Bella leaned forward slightly, her nose brushing against his hand briefly, not stopping him but acknowledging him, and then she shifted closer to the puppies, lowering her head as she began to lick their fur, her tongue moving gently but persistently, working to dry them in the way only a mother could, her actions instinctive, precise, her focus unwavering. The combination of warmth from the fire, the towel, and Bella's care began to take effect. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, but then more clearly as one of the puppies shifted more strongly, its small legs pushing slightly against the blanket, its breathing deepening as its body regained some measure of strength, and Jack felt a quiet release in his chest. Not relief fully, but something close, something that allowed him to continue without the same tightness that had followed him from the forest.
Stay close together now.
He moved to the small cabinet near the wall, opening it to retrieve a metal bowl and a container of water. His movements efficient as he poured a small amount into the bowl and set it near Bella, then added a portion of dry food from a sealed bag. The simple routine grounding him in a way he had not expected, because it was not a mission, not a task defined by clear objectives and endpoints, but something ongoing, something that required patience rather than precision. Bella hesitated only briefly before moving toward the bowl, her hunger evident in the way she lowered her head and began to eat, not aggressively, but with a quiet urgency that spoke of how long it had been since she had last been properly fed, and Jack stepped back slightly, giving her space, watching as she balanced her need for food with her attention on the puppies, lifting her head repeatedly to check on them before returning to the bowl. The cabin felt different now, the silence no longer empty but filled with small, meaningful sounds, the crackle of the fire, the soft movement of the puppies, the steady rhythm of rain outside, and Jack found himself standing still for a moment longer than necessary, his gaze moving across the scene as if trying to understand it, as if trying to place it within the structure of a life he had long believed would remain unchanged. He thought of Sarah then, not with the sharp pain that usually followed, but with something softer, something that felt closer to memory than loss, remembering the way she used to move through the house, the quiet kindness in her actions, the way she cared for small things without expecting anything in return, and for the first time in a long while, the memory did not feel like something that held him in place, but something that allowed him to move forward, even if only slightly. Time passed without him noticing exactly how much, measured only by the way the fire settled into a steady burn and the rain outside eased into a softer pattern. And when he returned to the puppies, he saw the change clearly, their bodies no longer shaking as violently, their breathing more even, their small forms shifting occasionally as they pressed closer to Bella, seeking warmth and comfort. And Bella, in turn, adjusted her position, curling around them more tightly, her body forming a barrier between them and the cooler air of the room. Jack placed another piece of wood on the fire before moving toward the window, his eyes scanning the darkness outside, more out of habit than expectation. And seeing nothing that suggested immediate danger, he allowed himself to step away, to sit briefly in the old chair near the hearth, his posture relaxing in a way it had not in years, his shoulders lowering slightly as the tension he carried began to ease. Not gone, but lighter. The night deepened, and at some point, without ceremony or decision, the urgency that had driven every moment since he heard that first cry began to settle into something else, something quieter, something that felt almost like peace. It was not complete, not permanent, but it was there, and Jack recognized it for what it was, a beginning. Sometime later, when the fire had burned lower and the room had grown still, Bella rose quietly from her place beside the puppies and moved toward the door, her steps careful, her body still tired but steadier than before, and Jack watched her without moving, understanding without needing to intervene. And when she slipped outside into the soft rain, he did not follow, trusting that she would return. She was gone only a short while, the time passing quietly in the cabin, and when she came back, she carried something small in her mouth, a rabbit, its body limp, its fur damp from the rain, and she set it down carefully just inside the door before looking toward Jack, not with fear, not with caution, but with something unmistakable, something that did not need explanation, and in that simple, silent gesture, there was gratitude. The rain no longer fell with the same cold persistence it had that first night. Instead, it came and went in gentle waves across the land, leaving behind a forest that breathed with quiet life. The earth softened, the air rich with the scent of damp pine and fresh growth. And around the cabin, the change was visible in small but meaningful ways, patches of green emerging where mud had once dominated, the sound of birds returning cautiously to the branches above. And within that shifting season, life inside and around the cabin began to take on a rhythm that had not existed before. The three puppies had grown, not suddenly, but steadily, their fragile forms gaining strength with each passing day, their once soaked and trembling bodies now covered in thickening black and tan fur that carried a healthy shine even in the filtered light of the forest. Their movements no longer uncertain but energetic, curious, filled with the restless exploration of youth, and though they still stayed close to Bella, there was a growing independence in the way they moved, the way they tested the boundaries of the space around them. Bella herself had changed as well, her body recovering its full strength, the sharp lines of exhaustion replaced by the solid, controlled posture of a strong and capable dog, her eyes still watchful but no longer filled with the same urgency, now holding a calm alertness that spoke of stability rather than fear. And she had taken on a new role with quiet authority, not just surviving, but teaching. Each morning, as the mist lifted slowly from the ground, she would lead the puppies just beyond the edge of the cabin's clearing, guiding them through the forest in short, deliberate movements, showing them how to move quietly across the uneven terrain, how to step lightly over branches rather than crashing through them, how to pause and listen before acting. And Jack often watched from a distance, standing near the porch, or leaning lightly against the cabin wall, his arms crossed loosely, his gaze following them as they disappeared briefly into the trees and then returned, the patterns repeating day after day with small variations that marked their progress. One of the puppies, slightly larger than the others with a more confident stance, often took the lead in these small explorations, its ears alert, its steps quicker, as if it naturally sought to understand the world before the others, while another remained more cautious, staying closer to Bella, its movements more measured, its reactions slower but deliberate. And the third moved somewhere between the two, curious but easily distracted, its attention shifting from one thing to another with a lightness that brought an unexpected sense of warmth to the otherwise quiet space. Jack had begun to recognize these differences, not with the analytical focus he once applied to missions, but with something softer, something closer to observation without judgment. And though he rarely spoke, even to himself, there were moments when a faint hint of something almost like a smile touched his expression, brief and subtle, but real. Inside the cabin, the changes were just as present, small adjustments that reflected a life no longer centered solely on one man, blankets arranged differently to accommodate the dogs, bowls placed near the door, a second chair pulled closer to the fire, not for use, but for presence. And though none of these things had been planned, they had settled into place naturally, as if the cabin itself had adapted to the new rhythm. It was on one of those mornings, when the air felt lighter and the rain had paused, that Jack noticed movement at the edge of the clearing, a figure approaching slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether to continue or turn back, and Jack straightened slightly, his posture shifting instinctively, his awareness sharpening as he stepped forward just enough to see more clearly. Ethan looked different than he had that night, though not entirely changed. His frame still lean, his movements still carrying a slight uncertainty, but there was something in the way he held himself now, less defensive, less guarded, as if he had made a decision that had not yet fully settled, but had already begun to shape him. His clothes were cleaner, though still worn, his jacket replaced by a simple flannel shirt layered over a gray t-shirt, his hair no longer plastered to his forehead but cut shorter, his face showing signs of restless nights but also something steadier, something that had not been there before. And when he reached the edge of the clearing, he stopped, not stepping fully into the open space until Jack's gaze met his. "I didn't know where else to go," Ethan said, his voice quieter than before, not weak, but measured, as if he was choosing his words carefully, and he kept his hands visible at his sides, a small but telling gesture that spoke of awareness, of understanding what it meant to approach someone like Jack. Jack did not respond immediately, his eyes studying the younger man, not looking for signs of deception, but for something else, something harder to define. And in that silence, Ethan held his ground, not retreating, not pressing forward, simply waiting. "I left," Ethan added after a moment, his voice carrying a weight that matched the words. And though he did not elaborate, he did not need to, the meaning clear enough in the way he stood, in the absence of the uncertainty that had defined him before. Jack exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting briefly toward the forest where Bella and the puppies had disappeared, and then back again. And though he did not fully lower his guard, something in him shifted slightly, enough to allow the possibility of something different.
It's okay.
"You stay out of trouble," Jack said finally, his voice calm, not welcoming, not dismissive, simply stating a condition, and Ethan nodded once, understanding more from the tone than the words themselves, and in that quiet exchange, something new began. Not a friendship, not yet, but a chance. As the day continued, Ethan remained at the edge of the clearing, not intruding, not assuming, helping where he could without being asked, stacking wood, clearing small debris, his movements careful, his presence restrained, and Jack observed it all without comment, allowing time to do what words could not. When Bella and the puppies returned later, their energy high from their time in the forest, Ethan stepped back instinctively, giving them space, and Bella paused briefly, her gaze settling on him, her posture alert but not aggressive. And after a moment she moved on, accepting his presence without challenge. And in that small, quiet acceptance, the boundaries of the space shifted once again. As evening approached, the light softened, the air cooling slightly as the first hints of another gentle rain returned, and Jack stood at the edge of the porch, looking out over the clearing, the cabin behind him no longer empty, the forest no longer distant. And for the first time in years, the life in front of him did not feel like something he had to endure, but something he could choose to be part of. And in that realization, quiet and unspoken, there was meaning. The rain had changed again, no longer cold and relentless as it had been in the early days, but softer now, lighter, arriving in gentle showers that passed quickly and left behind a quiet warmth in the air. And with that shift, spring had fully taken hold of the land around the cabin, the forest no longer heavy with damp stillness but alive with subtle movement, leaves unfolding in fresh green layers, sunlight filtering through branches in scattered patterns, and the ground, once thick with mud, now firm enough to carry footsteps without resistance. Jack Turner stood just outside the cabin that morning, his posture relaxed but steady, his hands resting loosely at his sides as he watched Bella and the 3 young dogs move across the clearing, their bodies no longer fragile or uncertain, but strong, agile, their movements confident in a way that spoke not only of growth, but of readiness. They had changed in ways that could not be measured by size alone, their instincts sharpened through Bella's guidance, their awareness tuned to the rhythms of the forest. And Jack could see it in the way they paused before entering the trees, in the way they listened, in the way they responded to Bella's subtle cues without hesitation, a silent communication that needed no instruction. Bella herself carried a different presence now, her body fully restored, her coat thick and clean, her posture calm but alert, her eyes steady as they moved between her young and the surrounding space, no longer defined by urgency or fear, but by quiet control. And when she looked toward Jack, there was no longer uncertainty in her gaze, only recognition, something settled, something understood. Ethan had been working near the edge of the clearing that morning, his movements purposeful as he repaired a section of fencing that had fallen into disuse. His hands more confident now, his posture no longer uncertain but grounded, shaped by days that had given him a different kind of structure than the one he had known before. His appearance had continued to change in small ways, his clothes cleaner, his hair trimmed, his expression steadier, and, though he still carried traces of the past in the quiet pauses between his movements, there was a clear direction to him now, something forward-looking, something that no longer turned back toward what he had left behind. He glanced up occasionally as Bella and the young dogs moved, not with suspicion, but with quiet respect, understanding the space they occupied and the trust that had been built within it. Jack took a slow breath, the air warmer than it had been in weeks, and let it settle before he stepped forward, moving toward the simple wooden gate that marked the edge of the clearing, not a barrier in the strict sense, but a boundary, a line that had defined the space between the safety of the cabin and the unpredictability of the forest beyond. His hand rested on the latch for a moment longer than necessary, not because he hesitated, but because he understood what the act meant, not just practically but symbolically. And when he lifted it and pulled the gate open, the sound was quiet, almost lost in the soft movement of the wind through the trees.
We have to get this done.
Bella noticed immediately, her head lifting as she turned toward him, her body still for a moment as she took in the change, and then she moved forward. Not quickly, not urgently, but with a measured pace, her young following behind her. Their steps eager but controlled, their attention divided between her and the open space beyond. They reached the gate and paused, the line between staying and leaving held in that brief stillness, and Bella turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting Jack's once more, and in that look there was no confusion, no fear, only acknowledgement, a quiet understanding of what he had done, of what he was offering, and Jack did not move, did not call them back, did not step forward, because this was not a moment that belonged to him to control. One of the young dogs stepped forward first, the largest of the three, its posture confident as it crossed the threshold into the forest, its body moving easily into the space it had been learning to navigate, and the second followed shortly after, its movements more cautious but steady, and Bella moved with them, her presence guiding, her focus already shifting toward the life beyond the clearing, and for a moment, it seemed that the transition would be complete, that the bond formed within the walls of the cabin would remain as something carried forward, but no longer present. The third dog, smaller than the others but not weak, with a distinctive white marking across its chest that stood out against the darker fur, hesitated at the edge of the gate, its ears tilting slightly as it looked toward the forest and then back toward the cabin, its body caught between two directions, and Jack watched without expectation, his expression unchanged, his stance open but still, allowing the moment to resolve itself without influence. The dog stepped forward once, then stopped, its head turning again, its eyes settling on Jack, and something in that look held, something that did not align with the movement of the others, and after a brief pause, it turned fully, stepping back from the threshold and moving toward him with a quiet certainty, its pace unhurried but deliberate. Bella noticed the shift, her head turning sharply as she paused a few steps into the forest, her eyes moving between the dog and Jack, and for a moment the tension returned, not fear, but something closer to decision, and then she exhaled softly, her posture easing as she turned back toward the trees, continuing forward with the other two, not looking back again. Ethan had stopped working, his hands resting loosely at his sides as he watched the moment unfold, his expression thoughtful, his eyes moving between Jack and the dog that now stood beside him, and there was something in his face that reflected understanding, not of the bond itself, but of the choice that had just been made. Jack looked down at the dog, its presence steady beside him, its body no longer uncertain, its eyes calm, and though he did not reach out immediately, did not mark the moment with any outward gesture, there was a subtle shift in his posture, something that acknowledged the change without needing to define it. "Max," he said quietly after a moment, the name simple, unforced, and the dog responded not with movement, but with stillness, remaining where it was, as if it had already chosen its place. The forest beyond the gate absorbed the movement of Bella and the other two until they were no longer visible, the space returning to its quiet rhythm, and Jack closed the gate slowly, not as a barrier, but as a recognition that something had ended and something else had begun, and as he turned back toward the cabin with Max at his side and Ethan nearby, the life that had once felt empty now carried a quiet, steady meaning that did not need to be questioned. Years had passed in quiet, steady rhythms that no longer felt empty but purposeful, marked not by the weight of memory alone, but by the presence of something that had grown in its place, and the cabin in Montana stood as it always had, weathered but strong, surrounded by a forest that had become both home and witness to a life that had slowly, almost imperceptibly, changed. Jack Turner had aged in those years, the lines on his face deeper now, his hair more gray than before, his movements still controlled but slower, carrying the natural weight of time rather than the burden of grief alone. and though the past had not disappeared, it no longer defined every moment of his present. Max had grown as well, no longer the small, uncertain puppy who had chosen to stay, but a full-grown German shepherd, tall and powerful with a thick black and tan coat and that same distinctive white marking across his chest, his posture confident, his movements precise, and his eyes sharp, intelligent, unwavering, often reflecting a loyalty that had never needed to be taught, only given space to exist. He stayed close to Jack in everything, not out of dependence, but out of choice. Moving beside him during daily routines, accompanying him on walks through the forest, resting near the cabin door at night, always present, always aware. Ethan had become something different too, no longer the uncertain young man who had stood frozen in the rain years before, but someone shaped by the choices he had made since, his frame stronger now, his posture more grounded, his face carrying the marks of experience but also clarity, his hair kept short, his expression steady, and he had taken on work that aligned with the path he had chosen, helping with local wildlife rescue and working alongside small volunteer groups that monitored the surrounding forests, his actions no longer guided by hesitation, but by quiet determination. It was on a day that began like many others, with a sky heavy but calm, that the change came again. The rain starting gradually before building into something heavier, something more insistent. The kind of rain that did not pass quickly but settled in, soaking the land until the ground could hold no more, and Jack noticed it early, the way the air shifted, the way the clouds pressed lower, the way the forest grew quieter, as if anticipating what was coming. By afternoon, the rain had turned into a steady downpour, and small streams that normally ran quietly through the forest began to swell, their paths widening, their movement faster, and Jack stood near the edge of the clearing, watching the water gather in places it usually did not. His expression thoughtful, his instincts alert, because he knew this pattern, had seen it before, and understood what it could become if it continued unchecked. He moved toward the lower path near the creek, intending to check the water level, Max following closely at his side, his ears alert, his posture attentive. And as they reached the edge, the sight confirmed what Jack had suspected. The creek had already risen beyond its normal boundaries. The current stronger, faster, carrying debris that had not been there before, and the ground along the bank was beginning to soften, small sections giving way under the pressure of the water. Jack stepped carefully, assessing the area, but the ground beneath him shifted more quickly than expected, a section of earth collapsing under his weight as he lost his footing and fell partially down the embankment. His body striking against the wet soil and debris, his leg catching awkwardly as he tried to brace himself, and for a moment the world narrowed to the impact, the sudden loss of balance, the sharp pull in his side that made movement difficult. Max reacted instantly, his body moving forward, his stance tense as he reached the edge, his eyes fixed on Jack, his breathing quick but controlled, and he let out a sharp bark, not of panic, but of alert, a call that carried both urgency and intent. Jack tried to push himself up, but the angle and the unstable ground made it difficult, his leg unsteady beneath him, the water rising slowly around the lower part of the embankment, and though he was not immediately in danger, he understood how quickly that could change if the rain continued, if the ground gave way further. "Go," Jack said, his voice firm despite the strain, his eyes meeting Max's, and though he did not need to explain, Max understood, the command clear, the intention unmistakable. And after a brief hesitation, as if confirming the decision, Max turned and ran, his body cutting through the rain as he moved back toward the cabin and beyond, not in confusion, but with direction. Time passed differently after that, measured not in minutes but in the steady rise of water, the slow shift of the ground beneath him, the effort required to maintain position without slipping further, and Jack focused on what he could control, adjusting his weight, bracing himself against a partially exposed root, conserving his energy as he waited, not with panic, but with the quiet patience of someone who had learned to endure. The rain continued, the sound constant, the forest blurred by motion and water, and then, faint at first, but unmistakable, came the sound of movement through the trees. Not one set of steps, but several, coordinated, purposeful, and Jack lifted his head slightly, his eyes scanning the direction of the sound as shapes began to emerge through the rain. Max appeared first, his body wet but steady, his pace slowing as he reached the edge of the clearing, and behind him, moving with a familiarity that required no introduction, came Bella. Older now, but still strong, her presence unmistakable, her posture alert, and with her were the two others, no longer small, no longer uncertain, but grown, their bodies powerful, their movements synchronized as they approached without hesitation. They reached the edge quickly, Bella moving closer first, her eyes locking onto Jack as she assessed the situation, her body lowering slightly as if preparing to act, and the others positioned themselves instinctively, not trained, but guided by something deeper, something learned long ago and carried forward. They did not rush blindly. They moved with purpose. Bella stepping down carefully along the safer edge of the embankment, her footing precise despite the unstable ground, and she reached Jack, her body pressing close, offering stability, while the others positioned themselves above, their presence creating a barrier, a support that allowed Jack to shift his weight more securely. Max remained closest, his eyes fixed on Jack, his stance unwavering, and with their combined presence, the moment shifted, not instantly safe, but no longer uncertain, and slowly, with effort, with careful movement, guided by both instinct and necessity, Jack was able to pull himself up, step by step, until he reached stable ground once more. He stood there for a moment, his breath heavy, the rain still falling around him, and his eyes moved from Max to Bella and then to the others, taking in what had just happened, not as something unexpected, but as something that had been set in motion long before, and he felt it then, not as a sudden surge, but as a quiet, overwhelming certainty, something that settled deep within him without resistance. "Kindness always comes back," he said softly, his voice steady despite the emotion that edged it, and as the rain continued to fall, no longer harsh but almost gentle, the space between them held that truth without needing anything more. In the end, what saved Jack was not strength, not skill, but the quiet return of kindness he once gave without expecting anything in return. And perhaps that is the way God works in our lives, not always through grand miracles, but through small acts of love that find their way back to us when we need them most. Sometimes we feel alone, forgotten, or lost in our own storms, but God sees every good thing we do, every moment we choose compassion over indifference, and in His time, He brings it back to us in ways we could never have planned. This story is a reminder that no act of kindness is ever wasted, and no heart that gives truly remains empty. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share where you are watching from, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that bring hope and faith. May God bless you, protect you, and fill your life with peace, love, and unexpected miracles every day.